This is The Crooked Moon, a 630-page folk horror D&D supplement from the folks over at Legends of Avantris. I have been waiting for this to arrive since I backed it 2 years ago in a Kickstarter that raised over $4 million. It draws heavy inspiration from Over the Garden Wall, the Cartoon Network miniseries, and even has a soundtrack composed by the band that did the music for that show. New character options, a dark and demented setting, and a 13-level spanning campaign. We're going to look at it all today, here on Adventure Night. Alright, so what is The Crooked Moon? This is a folk horror setting for D&D 5th edition. The book includes a completely new campaign setting called Druskenwald, new player options including backgrounds and character species, as well as an adventure that takes characters from level 1 to 14. There are also options in the book for continuing that campaign after level 14 all the way to level 20 if you want to. It includes new monsters, new magic items, and a whole bunch more. The Kickstarter for this book ran in the fall of 2023, and it included a core book, obviously, tarot cards, dice sets, STL files, which are like 3D files for player miniatures, and also a whole bunch of maps, a GM screen, and a music album by the Blasting Company, who, as I said, did the music for Over the Garden Wall. And they've really become one of my all-time favorite bands. Possibly my favorite. The campaign raised over $4 million, and it unlocked a ton of stretch goals, which increased the size of the book considerably. Now, the fulfillment was supposed to be completed by the fall of 2024. It was supposed to be you back it in the fall of 2023, and then you receive it before Halloween the next year. However, it got delayed and didn't end up getting delivered until the fall of 2025. In fact, one of the major reasons why they had to push the fulfillment of the campaign back was because of the release of D&D 5th edition 2024 edition, which came out only at the end of 2024 and the beginning of 2025. This meant that they had to adjust the game for that new game edition, but they also released a version for the 2014 rules, the original D&D 5th edition rules, and that's the one that I have. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later because this sort of 2024 versus 2014 is probably my biggest criticism of the whole thing, but we'll have plenty of time to get to that. Now what's actually in the book? It's enormous, as you can see. In fact, I think this is the 5th edition Player's Handbook, and then let me throw Curse of Strahd next to it as well. You can see that between the two of these books, it's probably a similar page count to one Crooked Moon. So you're getting a lot, which is great, especially when it's a Kickstarter and you never really know what you're going to get until it arrives. Now, the first section of the book is a setting guide for the campaign setting of Druskenwald. This is an island within a dark mist that functions sort of as an afterlife. And there's a dark train that takes the dead to Druskenwald, where they are reincarnated in some form on the island. This first part of the book includes a history of Druskenwald and how it sort of came to be what it is, a list of important figures and some details about them, as well as large-scale features like geography and the mist and things like that, and of course, how death is supposed to work in a world that is in and of itself an afterlife. Then there's a section for the 13 provinces of Druskenwald. Each has 3 pages, which includes art, some folklore for that province, notable NPCs, organizations in that province like guilds and things like that, as well as important locations like cities, and a list of adventure hooks that you can roll on a table to sort of set your own adventure within that individual province. So for example, Chernobus is one of the 13 provinces, and it's sort of a devil-infused Old West setting with an emphasis on like a place called Hotel Durango and kind of like little demons that run around and card tricks. And then there's also a province called Enoch, which is a sort of eternal harvest area where everybody's made of vegetables. It's very much in line with Pottsfield from Over the Garden Wall. Also, Enoch is literally a character in Over the Garden Wall, so that's a pretty direct reference. Now, the next section of the book includes player options. There are 13 new species introduced in this book, one for each province in Druskenwald, Each species only has a one-page spread with ability scores distributed using the Tasha's Cauldron of Everything optional rules, where you can put 2 points into one stat upon character creation and then 1 into another stat, or you can put 3 points into 3 individual stats. Now, an example is the Plagueborn, who are sort of rat people that live in Bubonia, which is like a plague-ridden province of Druskenwald, and they have they're upright walking, but they can transfer their like pestilence to enemies as one of their racial powers by scratching them with their claws. And then right across the page from them are the Harvestborn, who are the vegetable people from Enoch. Now, there are 15 subclasses offered in the Crooked Moon book, at least one for each class in the original D&D Player's Handbook, with a couple of them having 2, like the Warlock. Each subclass is presented on a 2-page spread. They're all flavored like the provinces, but they're not really one-to-one for any of them. So obviously the cleric that is the harvest domain is going to be really more geared towards Enoch, the province, but you could totally use that in another game, especially if you're playing something that's supposed to be folk horror. There's also the Warlock, whose patron is the Great Fool. So imagine being a Warlock, and instead of getting your powers from a devil or like Cthulhu, you just get them from an all-powerful clown. And that's an option. But my personal favorite is the Bard College of Whistles, where you are a bard and you can basically summon ghosts into existence with your music, with your whistling. It's a lot like that scene in Sinners where he's playing guitar in the juke joint and just all these people from all across history sort of like materializing there. Very cool, highly recommend. Now, there are also 13 backgrounds to close off our character options in the book. Some of these backgrounds are pretty specific to Druskenwald, others are a little bit more general. So for example, there's the Ghostlight Express Passenger, which is a background for someone who rides the Ghostlight Express, the train that carries souls into Druskenwald. But there's also a Crossroads Gambler, which is pretty applicable to a couple different settings, especially if you wanted to use it in something a little bit more arcane punk like Eberron that feels closer to 19th century. Now, I will say these backgrounds are really done more in the D&D 2024 style, even in the 2014 version of the book. A lot of this is because each background gets its own feat instead of like a specific feature within the background itself. So, for example, the 2014 Sailor background would just say, hey, you can get passage on a ship on almost any port because of your sailor ties. It was just sort of a story thing. It was something you could use to your advantage, but it was for the broader parts of the game. In Crooked Moon, your backgrounds have a feat directly attached to them, like the Crossroads Gambler, where you get advantage every time you succeed on something that involves luck. And that's just a direct mechanical effect. I'm not a huge fan of the 2024 style of backgrounds, but I know a lot of people are, and so if you're planning on running it with 2024, that's probably going to be pretty easy. But if you're going to be using the 2014 one, like I am, you may have a little bit more trouble making that not hugely overpowered. And then just to briefly touch on feats, this book does include a whole bunch of feats, mostly for level 1 characters, but it also offers a couple that have a prerequisite of being level 4 or higher, and you can always alter the level 1 feats to make them a little bit more powerful by just adding an ability score increase. Now, one thing that the Crooked Moon adds that is completely new to the 5e rule set, at least as far as I know, are the Dark Bargains. These are deals that you can strike up with terrifying and powerful creatures across Druskenwald, or really in any game. They're not super specific to the setting, so you could absolutely use them in your own game if you wanted to. And the way that they work is just that you get an advantage at the expense of something else. So, for example, one of them is called the Call of the Lonely, and the way that this bargain works is that you can spawn in a doppelganger, like a shadow doppelganger of yourself, anytime you're alone and nobody is looking at you, and that doppelganger can help you out, and I think it can even be effective in combat. But if any of your allies see you or your doppelganger while you're using this effect, they have to save against being afraid of you and running away. So it's very much risk-reward, but I can totally imagine using this in a game where a powerful being, instead of smiting the characters, or instead of the characters killing the powerful being, just accept this sort of two-way deal. And then, of course, to increase the flavor of our spellcaster classes, a bunch of new spells have been included that are more folk horror themed, and these can be integrated into the classes easily with new spell lists for each spell casting class that says when these spells unlock, at which level, and how to integrate them into your regular spells that you get from the player's handbook. Now, the next part of the book, and by far the largest, it's this whole area that I marked with the ribbon here. By the way, you get a ribbon. That's cool. This whole middle section is just the adventure, The Crooked Moon. I'm not going to go into this with too much detail because I don't want to spoil anything about it, and I personally have only read over a few chapters in it, but man, it looks cool. The first section starts out with a summary of the setting, kind of where the players will be having the action, because it's going to be different from the 13 provinces that you're introduced to at the beginning of the book. This is going to be a 14th province, shall we say, called Wickermore Hollow, that is beyond the control of the ruling court that lords over the 13 provinces themselves. There's also a summary of the whole campaign's overarching plot, an overview of the most important characters who will come up during the campaign, and a setting guide for Wickermore Hollow. Another cool part of this how to run the game section is the tarot reading effects, because early on in the story, minor spoiler, you're going to potentially get a tarot reading from one of the NPCs, and this will actually have effects on your characters later in the campaign, and it says exactly what all those effects are. This is very similar to the Curse of Strahd Taraka deck, and the way that you have that reading at the beginning of that adventure, and then it affects things that come up later. And then another important thing about this section is the introduction of the Fate Weaving system. Now, the Fate Weaving system was a big selling point on Kickstarter. The intention was to intertwine characters' stories personally with the stories within the campaign. Players will basically select a thread, and then things will happen throughout the campaign according to the thread that they selected. So there's various plot beats. So the book will say the person with this thread is going to have this vision whenever this character appears for the first time. DMs are encouraged to connect the thread to the character's backstory so that you can really tie everything together. And then presumably this lets all the characters kind of feel like they are written into the story. I'm going to be completely honest. This is the kind of stuff that I don't particularly like to use in my games, but for people who really want like a cinematic experience, this is the way. Now let's talk about the adventure itself. The Crooked Moon is an adventure which takes characters from levels 1 to level 13, and then you can either finish at 14 or you can continue on to level 20 with the expansion at the back that kind of gives you a more free-form suggestions about how to get the players up higher. But the first 13 levels are all laid out with individual chapters and different locations. There are 16 adventure chapters. Most of them are like legs of the adventure and different bosses that you sort of lead up to fighting, but some of them are also setting guides. Like there is a setting guide just for Wickermore Village, the hub town that your characters kind of start in and will probably be returning to after each individual adventure along the map. Each chapter fleshes out the Wickermore Hollow characters, locales, and enemies a little bit more as you progress and as characters learn more about them. And then, as I mentioned, there's that very last chapter where they just tell you how you can stretch the story out beyond what the characters have already completed. And this is, again, after 13 levels of play. If you want to keep going, they've given you options to do that. And I think that really speaks to just like how complete this book is. They really thought about everything that people could potentially want to do with it. And then at the very back of the book are the appendices. Appendix A is a bestiary with over 100 pages of monsters. These are monsters and enemies from the adventure and monsters that you can just drop into your own campaigns if you want to. New legendary monsters and a whole section for familiars that the players can befriend. And I think that's really cool. Appendix B is the treasury. This is the magic item portion of the book, except all these magic items have kind of an interesting twist that's very Crooked Moon, very folk horror, and I really like it. The fabled heirlooms are magic items that level with the players, and a lot of them are sort of legendary implements used by enemies or famous characters within Wickermore Hollow or within the world of the Crooked Moon. If your player picks up a staff off of one guy in the first adventure and then carries it all the way with him to level 13, it's going to keep getting stronger at 3 different intervals along that journey. There's also a whole section on cursed curios, which are sort of more mundane magic items that have a cost for using. So they will curse your character as well as give them the benefit of whatever that item does when your character is attuned to them. Appendix C is chaotic curses, and this is something pretty unique. There are 156 curses on a list tied to tarot cards and their orientation depending on how you would draw them. But these curses are not quite as negative as you're probably imagining them to be. In fact, most of them are quite silly. And they even say in the text before that section, hey, this is totally optional. You can use these at your own discretion if you think it would be fun and if that fits the flavor of your game. But if you're a more hardcore horror fan, maybe this isn't going to be for you. Now, if you've watched Legends of Avantris on YouTube, their stuff is funny. So I can see where this instinct to make the game more whimsical comes from. And honestly, I'm totally here for it. But I also like that they don't build it into any of the core parts of the game, so that if you really are like, I don't really want to have a silly curse hit my character temporarily, the GM can understand this and just kind of remove it. For example, there is a curse for the card the Hermit, and what it does is it turns the character into a talking black cat. The character remembers who they are, but nobody else has any reason to believe them. So if it sounds fun to you to have one of your characters desperately pleading with the rest of the party that they are actually themselves and not just some random talking cat that wandered out of the forest, these curses are absolutely for you. All right, let's talk about my thoughts on the Crooked Moon. This is going to be my sort of review portion of the video. Now, regardless of what I say, I want you to know that I really like this book, and I think it's an incredible resource. So even if I have criticisms, they really pale in comparison to the good things. In fact, one of the best things about this book is that it got me excited to play D&D 5e again. I haven't wanted to play D&D 5e in a couple years now. I mean, I've run it a couple times because it's what's popular, it's what people want, and I've played in it a bit, but in general, I'm looking to other horizons after reading Spelljammer and just being so disappointed, and then the whole OGL debacle and everything. But to be honest, looking at this book and like reading through the subclasses and just the adventure structure and everything got me so interested in diving back into this game, which used to be like my obsession for years. So I bravo. And to be honest, a lot of that comes from the fact that the Crooked Moon is just aesthetically brilliant. It is so well put together. Now, I really like folk horror just already. In fact, it's kind of the only genre of horror that I really enjoy. But I also, I like folk music and I'm a banjo player, so that's par for the course, I guess. But the art in this book is just stunning, and it's also so consistent. During the Kickstarter, I remember seeing a whole bunch of different art styles and being a little dubious that they were going to be able to homogenize the whole thing and create like a consistent voice, and they totally do. It sort of marries the more, Cartoon Network, Over the Garden Wall, like cartoonishness with the D&D high fantasy, like high detail, crazy vignettes, and gives you this very sort of understated but also super creative picture of what Druskenwald looks like to the players. And my God, there's just so much content. This book was originally, I think, intended to be 400 pages. They said 400 plus on their Kickstarter, which is already a lot. But then with all the stretch goals and I think just all the time that they had to work on it, it totally ballooned out into this 630-page masterpiece. So you are absolutely getting your money's worth for it. Although I do want to talk about money a little bit, because this book is not cheap. Crooked Moon retails for $70. So this book itself is going to run you $70. And that's probably, just the physical, although I'm guessing if you buy it from certain retailers, you'll get the PDF as well. They have not actually started selling physical copies. It's so early right now. And while I do think that the book is a great value for money, 70 is a little steep, even for me. And it was a little cheaper on the Kickstarter too. But I have trouble spending $70 in one go or for one single volume. Now, if you're going to, this is the single volume to do that for, but just be wary that it is not a low barrier of entry. So yeah, $70 book, but it's a really good book. Do with that what you will. Now, the Crooked Moon is not perfect, and in fact, there are a couple things that really sort of irk me about it. One is the 13 provinces. So that's the very start of the book, and I remember initially when I got the PDF, I was flipping through that part and going, gosh, I don't groove with this at all. It's very much sort of quantity over detail quality. Some of the settings are cool, some of the provinces are neat. I like Enoch, I like a couple of the other sort of folksy ones. There's one that's just London and everyone is a werewolf. So like there's cool, creative jumping off point stuff, but there's also one that's like owls who study the stars. I don't know. The problem is I would have really preferred 4 great provinces with a lot of detail and really interesting races than 13 provinces that all have a tiny bit of lore, a few locations, and are all a little bit disjointed in terms of theme. And then I have a little bit of beef with the species. There's just so many of them. Same as the provinces. I would much have preferred fewer species with a lot more detail, but I get the 13 is a cool number and they want to add a lot of different player options because then they can say 13 new species included in the book. But the design behind these very much is more in line with what you see in like Mordenkainen's Monsters of the Multiverse, where you just kind of get a single page, here's your numbers, here's a tiny bit of lore, here's one picture, and then we move on. Instead of what you get in like Volo's Guide to Monsters, where you'll have, the stats for whatever the species is, and then you also just have pages upon pages of lore for them. I prefer to have that extra background, even if I don't use it, rather than a bunch of variety and a bunch of new player options. But I'm also a GM, so more lore is going to be advantageous to me, and player options aren't necessarily. So take that with a grain of salt. And then my last sort of major gripe with the Crooked Moon is the 2014 D&D versus 2024 D&D integration. And I talked about this a little bit already, but I'm going to bring it up again. Even the 2014 printing that I have feels like a compromise that I didn't really want to make when I backed this in 2023. Because I have not moved on to D&D 2024, and maybe I will someday, but right now I just want to play D&D 2014. And having the book be written in such a way where it doesn't really feel like it's even intended to be used with that rule set is a little bit frustrating. It's not, a deal breaker. I still love it, but it means that I'm going to have to do more work on my end to make everything cohere. And if I'm, paying money for a book, I kind of don't want to have to fix it. I don't know. I imagine more of the changes like in the monster stats and some of the balancing is going to be more important than what I'm seeing on like the character creation side. Only really play will tell how that goes. So for that I'm grateful, but I just overall don't feel like this is a product for the Dungeons & Dragons that I was playing at the time that I backed it 2 years ago. Now something that doesn't really bother me, but is not what I expected, is that the adventure is so much of the book. It's the majority of the pages, easily. I thought this book was going to be a setting with an adventure, and it's definitely an adventure with a setting. And that's okay, but like if I had gotten that really detailed Druskenwald that I had been imagining, then it probably wouldn't have turned out like this. That being said though, the adventure is so awesome, and I think if you really want to run this adventure, 100% this book is for you. It made me want to run the whole long campaign from level 1 to 13, and I have never run a D&D campaign that has gone up even remotely that high. And even reading, adventures that I really like Tomb of Annihilation, looking at them like, oh, this is really, really cool. I'm not gonna run all of this. But this Crooked Moon, I might run all of this. It's really cool. And even if you don't want to run all of it, the first chapter of the adventure can be run as a one-shot, and they tell you how to do that, which I think is incredible. So we'll see when I'm actually running that first chapter, if it really does stand alone as well as they say it does, but I'm so happy they even bothered to include that feature. I'm going to forgive them for a lot. The art for the NPCs and the monsters is unparalleled. It's so good, and there's so much of it too. It's like Tomb of Annihilation, where like every NPC there's an image for. Now I could have probably done with more setting art, like maybe more landscapes or scenes of buildings and cities, just to kind of get a sense of the population density in Druskenwald or the level of industrialization in certain parts of the island. But that's really nitpicking. So I think to conclude, I just want to say that there's something for everyone in the Crooked Moon. There is so much of it just already that some of it has got to be for you. There's enough whimsy for a comedic game, there is enough horror for a really dialed-in scary game, and there's also stuff that can be pulled into other settings. I think easily you could use a lot of those subclasses in your regular D&D games, especially if you're playing in a setting like Eberron that's sort of industrial adjacent. And it also has all flavors of horror, not just folk horror. I think folk horror is obviously the most prominent, but like there's a whole province that's like Cthulhu Egypt and there's spider people who live there. Like that's a very different vibe to folk horror. But let me know in the comments which parts of this book you would use, which ones you'd leave behind, and if you're excited about getting your own copy to take a look at all that the Crooked Moon has to offer. Don't forget to like this video to show me that you appreciated it, and also subscribe to the channel if you want more content like this. I'm kind of all over the place, but I do a lot of OSR game discussion and overviews of Merkborg hacks and stuff like that. And who knows, maybe I'll be doing more 5e stuff going forward as well. It's going to be a fun ride discovering what exactly this channel is going to turn into. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.